Hey everyone, Synthetic Future here, and today we're going to take a look at the Arturia CMI V. This is actually take 2, so this might be a little bit of a weird video with intercuts between different takes. It's just that there's a lot to cover here, and it's a bit tricky to find the right way to go about this. So beware for some pretty weird jumps in this video. Aside from that, what are we looking at? We are looking at the Fairlight CMI. This is one of the first, if not the first, digital sampler. It was released in 1979, and it was a pretty insanely expensive piece of kit back in the day. You could pretty much buy a house for how much these things did cost. And on record, there are only 4 sold in the entirety of the Netherlands, so these things are incredibly rare still to this day. So if you're looking to get a real one, well, you better have some money to spend. Aside from really rich people like us, we are stuck with the Arturia version, or there are a few other emulations as well. But the one we're looking at right now is the Arturia version. Yeah, where do you start with this thing? I think the most obvious place is with the sampling. Personally, I find it the least interesting part of this synthesizer, but here we go. I loaded in a sample of Ghost Hack. Actually, no, let's backpedal one little bit. Let's start with how the synthesizer loads. So if you load up this plugin, you will see this screen. And in almost classic Arturia fashion, it's extremely inefficient, very wasteful of your screen real estate, and actually not all that practical. So you're just going to ignore it and click on to the actual thing. There we go, covered that. One less thing to talk about. So I loaded up a Ghost Hack sample for this, very simple pad sample. Not all that exciting, but it does the job. So you can see your sample, you can show it in 3D, which is kind of interesting. You can spin it around. I'm pretty sure that this probably broke people's minds back in the day, but yeah, there you go. You can zoom in and zoom out. Very cool. This is not the most interesting sample to look at, but there we go. So that's pretty nice. And you can also follow it in the 3D space, which is pretty cool, especially when you zoom in a little bit. You can see it wiggling around there. And that's your sampling. Now we get a few functionalities here. Let's put in 2D. So this is your basic sample thing. And right now I have a Ghost Hack sample loaded here, so we can just play the sample like usual. You can set the end and start with the little thingies on the top or with the sliders here. You can set it to loop, in which case it will loop in the region which is marked with the lower thingies. Now, it's a bit annoying that the left one sets the start, so it also moves the end, so you can't just slide one to the place you want to have the other to the place you want. You really have to set the start and then change the end. Minor inconvenience. You can also set it to loop backwards and forwards. It's pretty cool. You also have some control over the tuning, so in octaves, semitones and fine tuning. And you get a filter. Basic low pass filter. You get the level. And you can also send to the auxiliary, which is currently not set up, so that doesn't do anything. Our envelope is a little bit weird because you only get the attack and the dampening. Now the attack is what you would expect it to be. It dictates how long it takes for the sound to reach full volume. Dampening is a little bit weird because it's kind of like release. But you can't set the curve or something. So it's not a standard ADSR. It's a little bit different, but it's easy enough to get your head around. You also get a vibrato, which can vibrate both the filter and level as well. And when you set a delay, it takes a little bit before it starts. And you can set the attack to make it go ramp up faster or slower in the vibrato. So that's vibrato. Let's quickly reset. Double click to reset. Very easy. And you also get portamento. Which actually works pretty good with these kind of sounds. Mildly theremin-like sounds. So that's your basic sampling. You can do some editing with it, in which case you can change, well, the gain, you can reverse the sample. If you want to, you can also invert it, left-right inversion, and change the bit depth, which is pretty cool. So right now it's set to 16 bits, which is actually more than the original unit had, because the original only had 8 bits. So that's pretty cool. I think my vibrato is slightly confused. There we go. So you can change the bit depth. And it's pretty cool to see the interface reflect this. Aside from that, you can also change the sample rate, which has an auto set function to get the best sample rate for your sample. You can also just scroll it up and down. Easiest way to do this is with control, holding the control. Difficult sentence. If you hold control, you can quick scroll and really go fast from one point to the other. I think you can also just type things in if you want to. It only goes to the sample rate of 44,000, I think. 44.1k. Obviously, the lower the sample rate and the lower the bit depth, the lower the resolution of the sample, so the more old school it sounds. There's a lot of people buying very old samplers at very high prices just to get the low sample rate sound. To me it's a bit crazy, because sample rate reduction is fairly easy to do, but if it's your thing, it's your thing. A sort of cool function is that you can actually convert your sample into synthesis, which we will come back to. And after that we get into the mod matrix and all that sort of fun stuff. So we're going to ignore that for now, and let's go to this second option. So this thing doesn't have traditional oscillators. You can either load in a sample, a time synth, as they call it, or a spectral synth. What is the time synth? For this we are going to have to actually reset it. Yep, that's actually the best way to show it. So let's quickly reset it. Now it always loads in a default sample. You can just ignore that, replace it, whatever. Let's go into time synth. So this is an additive synthesizer. So it works a little bit different than your basic subtractive synthesizer. You both basically get 32 harmonics of the note you play, which you can build up. And this display shows the harmonic over time, just to make it easier. So if you just take the fundamental harmonic, you will get a sine wave. And now you can add extra harmonics to shape this basic sine wave. So let's take, for instance, the second harmonic. And let's make this a little bit less. Even less. Even less. Now, if you do this really well, instead of this kind of haphazard way, you can actually create a very nice sawtooth. This is getting better. That takes a little bit of practice to really get there. Oh, this is too high, so you need to kind of fiddle around with it a little bit. And if you are extremely patient, you can actually work out a perfectly nice sawtooth with just adding the harmonics as needed, which we are not going to bother to do, but that's basically the idea of additive synthesis. You take one harmonic and you add extra harmonics to create sounds. Actually, Ben Jordan did a really great video about additive synthesis, so if you really want to know everything about additive synthesis and how to make absolutely every possible sound with additive synthesis, yeah, just check out this video, because he knows a lot more about this stuff. And yeah, recommend it, definitely. So this is kind of the boring thing to do. The fun thing to do is to reset everything. Get back into time synth, because you can actually animate these points. So you can, for instance, and we are going to have to make it a little bit longer because it's a bit short now. Let's make it, I don't know, 1,000 samples. And you can actually see here how the sine wave forms. So right now the volume of the harmonic is 0 at the start, so it's flat, and the harmonic increases in intensity, and you will see that the sine wave forms. That's pretty cool. Let's go one octave up and let's do the same thing. So we just pull it up. There we go. And we can go all the way to dog whistle, kind of annoying sounds. Anyways, you can animate all of these, and that's kind of the power of this synthesizer. And actually pretty cool is if you go back into control, you will see the waveform you have created by adding and subtracting these different things. The only thing which is a little bit annoying in the UI is that you can't quickly identify what's going on in the DX7. Let me just quickly pull that one up, because I think the DX7 actually does that really nicely. In the DX7 you have this graphical interface where you can see all the envelopes. So you can actually see what all the other envelopes are doing. In this one, you just have to go through all of them to see what the hell is going on. But you do see the end result for the entire thing, so that's kind of cool. And if you are actually really smart, you can probably work out how to create certain sounds. I'm not, but it is still fun to kind of mess around with and see where things are going. And like I said, anything you do here, you see back in this graph, so you can actually see what your resulting sound is. Now let's say that's not entirely the effect that's desired, which it probably isn't. You can also take your sample, so if you go back into the sample, and I will load back my ghost hack sample. I think it will, I don't actually remember. This one? I think that's the one. So what we can do now is, because we don't want to create the entire time synth thing ourselves, because it's way too much work, we can actually take a sample, just crank up the bitrate, crank up the sample rate, because why not? We're working on a modern PC. And you can just hit analyze. And this was probably an operation that took a little bit of time in the days of old, but right now it's just like a second. And what CMI tries to do is it tries to recreate your sample, using the additive synthesis engine. And you can see the general shape is pretty good. It's like this is a little bit higher here. Yeah, definitely a bit higher. But mostly all the bumps are there. So just for reference, this was our original sound. And if we see what Time Synth did with it, let's just crank it a little bit. That's not exactly precise. So my guess is we botched something there because I got it closer than this. Actually, let's give it a little bit less. There we go. I probably would like to have... And the interesting thing is now you can actually go back into the editing view of Time Synth and see how this sound is created by the synthesizer, which is a lot of points, which is something you are never going to do by yourself, because this is a lot of work to make. But this is actually every harmonic moving around in your sample, and it tries to regenerate that sound. So that's pretty insane. You can also do it the other way around. So if you want to mess around with the Time Synth and try to create your own sound, you can actually convert it back into a sample as well, just hitting compute, and now our Time Synth thing transferred to sample, and you can use it as a normal sample. Which is very interesting. It's a sort of, yeah, it's definitely a different workflow. And additive synthesis is definitely a thing which is very interesting. It's extremely deep, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. Editing from this perspective, though, for me, it's very alien. It's kind of weird to think about where harmonics are and try to use that to create a sound. Especially if you see how many points it takes to create a average sounding sound. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It also includes, by the way, a lot of sounds from the original unit, but you can also load your own samples like demonstrated. Let's just do something fairly simple. Let's do a bell. There's some bells here. Bell. Right. We can load this into our synthesis. Probably could once again benefit from a little bit more resolution here. It really takes a little bit of tinkering around with the settings to find the best settings for a specific sound. That's actually pretty close. And if you wanted to make this sound from scratch with additive, you would have to draw in all these curves for all the harmonic tones. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of work. But the interesting thing is you could... It's really fun to watch all these little bars dance. You could actually edit just this curve if you wanted to. So let's say we want to make a little bit louder here again. We can just drag this point up. You can actually hear that's fundamental. That's right about here. Oh, it's more like here. And that gets translated back into your sample as well. Yeah, so that's the second way to work with the CMI. So you can load samples, you can change the samples into the time synth, or you can just straight up draw in the time synth. And there's a third way of working, which is actually a little bit more sensible if you're going to work from scratch. And that's Spectral Synth. So Spectral Synth is basically time synth, but easier to edit because you edit all 32 bands in one go instead of editing all the separate bands. So it's a little bit easier to work with. So that's your basic sine wave. Now you can change where the center is of your curve. You can add spread, so now you can see it starts to add harmonics. So if we have quite a few harmonics and we move the center, we lose some bottom end, we gain some mid end, and we lose some high end. Here we have a lot of bottom, here we have a lot of high. And we can also make it a little bit lopsided. So if we want to move it more, so if we want to have this curve, but we want to move it more towards the bass side, or more towards the high side. We can also add a fundamental boost if you want to keep the fundamental in there. All the other controls stay the exact same. And this is pretty interesting. Let's see if we should be able to create So yeah, there's quite a bit of sonic range there, and the cool thing is you don't have to use sine waves as your fundamental noise or sound source. So this is your sine wave, but you can also use other shapes. So you can also use sawtooth as your wave table, and then you can add harmonic sawtooths to your sound. So let's do, can I do 2? Yeah, there we go. And you can also do a square or saw, or several different types of sine wave with different resolutions. A metallizer, pulse width, ultra saw, and so you can add extra harmonic ultra saws to your ultra saw. And the fun thing is, you can actually use this same functionality in your time synth as well. You can also choose to do the synthesis with another type of wavetable. So this is with just a sine, so that's our bell sound. But once you start to use harmonic squares, it gets more buzzy. I mean, you could literally write a book about this thing just to talk about all the possibilities you have with this thing. But that's just kind of this short overview of things. So that's sampling, time synth, and spectral synth. which is of course all good stuff. But where would we be without actually being able to move these controls around? Because that's part of the fun, right? So that's where our mod matrix comes in. Now, controls and switches refers to the front panel controls, which are these switches. A little fun fact, if you look closely here, you can actually see it change on the screen. So that's a neat little detail. And these switches, again, I think this view is absolutely needless, so I don't really bother with them, but you could of course bind these to CC if you want to. I'm more interested in functions though, because I think functions is far more interesting. So let's take function A, let's hit the map, and now we can just move around parameters. So let's say our evolution center, our spread, and our bias get affected by function A, and we make it, oh, we can't set it, we first need to make the function. So let's make the function. Function A, let's make this a triangle. And now you can see all these values moving along with that triangle wave. Actually, can we slow it down a little bit? We can. And we might want to actually move this. Terrible noise, terrible noise. I'm very sorry for that. But that's basically here you can see how it's modulating. You can also change the height, of course, the level of the entire thing if you want to. And you can draw in any shape you want. This is Arturia fashion, so that's pretty cool. You can actually make curves in here. If we were to reset it, I think we can do that. Let's just do a basic rise, that works. Okay, cool. Oops. Nope. Yes, there we go. Remove that point, remove that point. There we go. So we do want to point here. Cool. And now we can also draw in different shapes. And if we want to, we can curve them. It's really good for annoying sounds. And added to that, you can also set a little bit of randomness in the timing. And this is kind of cool because this reminds me of the Buckla easel, where they also had this kind of graph editor. You can actually set for each point a little bit of randomness. So you can set randomness in time, which generates these horizontal thingies indicating there's randomness in time. And you can also set randomness in level. And this basically says that this point can move around horizontally, so it can be either louder or softer. And it can be either faster or slower. So every time you play it, and the fun thing here is that the next point will stay in time. So if this thing becomes really slow, this slope has to be faster. So this thing can be in time. If this thing is really fast, this slope can be slower. And this way you can create quite a bit of randomness in your sound. And I think that's a pretty cool function. You can loop it if you want to make it running, so it ignores the triggers. If you turn off the sync, there we go. And you can also one-shot these things if you want to. So that's pretty awesome. I don't know how many points you can make. I'm going to mention a few. Yeah, it's 14 points. in total that you can set up to make your shape, and you have 6 of these to your disposal. So that's your basic modulator. So not your standard LFOs. This is a little bit more involved. It's kind of like an MSEC, I guess, mostly. A little bit weird in the looping because you can't set looping points, but still cool functionality. And you can also assign switches if you want to. And this is actually kind of surprising because you can actually just click any switch you want. For instance, these switches. And now if you hit this button, it will turn it on and off. That's cool, I assume. And you can map all your MIDI functions as well if you want to. So you can map your mod wheel, velocity, aftertouch, all sorts of cool stuff right onto the synthesizer. So now if I press the mod wheel, it will change where the spread is, while also maintaining the modulation. Is that everything? Yes, actually, that's all the basic functionality. So multiply this by 10, and that's the start of this journey, actually. Because this is only the generators, and we have more tabs. We also have a sequencer, a mixer, and mapping. So like I said, this is one involved thing. Just to kind of reduce the annoyance of this absolutely horrible sound I make, let's just take a nice sound. Yeah, it's much better than the ugly noise I made. And let's dive into sequencer for a second. So this is basically, well, it's a sequencer. Shocking. And you actually get several patterns to use, 8 patterns, which you can use or not use. I think this patch uses only pattern 1. Yep. So that's cool. And you can actually map these to your switches again, so you can switch from there, or you can play them from here. So that's pretty cool. Editing this is a little bit annoying because you can just drag them short and longer if you want to. That's pretty easy. Right click removes them. That's pretty easy. Actually changing the note though, that's a little bit annoying. So you can either change it down here with the note value, or you can mouse over exactly where the note is and you get the arrows and you can drag them up and down. It's not incredibly nice to use, but it's there. Actually, I would think if I were to use sequencing, I would probably still do it in my DAW because it's just easier to do, but you can, for each voice, create a sequence and you can make pretty elaborate stuff if you are so inclined. Next step. I'm just going to rush a little bit through this because otherwise we are never going to be done with this. The mixer. So the mixer has insert effects for each voice, so that's pretty cool. Aside from that, you get the aux channel. The aux channel you can find in the first screen where somewhere... Oh, there we go. There's the aux send. So you can just slide this. That will send it to the aux channel. And in the aux channel right now is a reverb. And you can switch this up. Now it is important to note there's only one effect per channel, and there's only one aux effect, and there's also a master effect. No, actually 2 master effects, so you can go pretty wild there. The effects you can choose from are from the Arturia suite, the full suite, which should be in every plugin. Arturia, please, come on. Chorus delay, analog delay, phaser, pitch shift, lastly flanger, distortion EQ, compressor, limiter, destroy, and auto pen. Destroy is pretty nasty. Some proper destruction going on there. And actually you can test every individual sound here. So that's pretty nice. If you're setting up effects per channel, you can just hit a little button and you don't have to mute things. So it's a pretty nice workflow thing. Aside from that, of course, you can set the level for every channel if you want to, the panning, and oh, the accent is also here. Now, that's very lovely and thoughtful. Saves a little bit of time. And last but not least, you can actually set ranges, so you can actually make, if you want to, 8 splits using 8 different sounds, or you can partially layer and do all sorts of interesting stuff. You can mess up the global tuning and the global scale. It's a really interesting way of writing down skill, I guess. It's not something I'm familiar with. That's for sure. You have your polyphony, your channel, your root node, pretty basic stuff. You can also load in some preset ways of doing it. Oh, this is a split for the first and the second voice. So I should... There we go. That's a split. I do have to admit, I really enjoy the visual feedback here. That's very pretty. Yeah, that's definitely very pretty. So that's the CMI. Even in this long format, it's pretty rushed. Like I said, if you want to know more about additive synthesis, there's other people who can tell you a lot more. I don't think it's for the scope of this video to go into all the details of additive synthesis. Usability of the CMI. So I didn't rank the CMI very high in my first video. I think I'm actually going to have to do a follow-up video for my very first video in this series after reviewing all these synths, how I feel about their ranking. I would say this synthesizer is definitely very unique. It really has its own sound. It definitely has a very unique workflow. The presets are also pretty interesting, especially this additive pad is very nice, and I will splice in some more sounds in the course of this video and of course at the end. But because you have the sampling capability and you can actually load in your own samples, it's pretty flexible. Aside from that, having all the editing capabilities with the time synth, where you can really change every harmonic if you want to. It's very involved, and it can create very interesting sounds, although most sounds do have a little bit of that low bitrate vibe, which is of course sensible because it's supposed to emulate an 8-bit sampler, and 8 bits is not that incredibly much, so it makes sense that it's a bit buzzy and stuff. It's probably why a lot of people like it. I would say just for sampling in general, I would probably prefer using something like Pigments because it's a little bit more modern and it does some granular stuff and it's a little bit more workflow optimized for sampling. But if you are looking for a very creative way to mess around with your samples, this definitely fits the bill, even though I would say it's not very easy to use because you have to know a bit about, well, of course, additive synthesis. I would almost dare to say there's a little bit of luck involved to get all the things right, because I'm kind of hard pressed to believe that all these effects are completely predictable, but that might just be me not being an additive synthesis whiz. I would say usability, it really depends on what you are going for. If you are really into that old school sampler sound, this is right down your alley. If you just want to make synth sounds from scratch, I would say this is probably one of those synths you'll look over, which is exactly the reason why I at first thought, not that interesting for me personally. But I can see a lot of potential here. So your mileage will definitely be subject to your preferences here. Overall, I think the interface is, for Arturia's sake, good. Once you get out of the ridiculous stupid view, which is this. This is just, well, crap. It's really unusable. But once you get in here, it's pretty good. It's a bit annoying that there's a lot of screen moving and everything is animated. So moving around, I'm going to make some people nauseous with this, but if you want to go from one screen to another screen, you get a little animation, and it all takes a little second to load. It's not the most responsive, snappy interface in the world. Once again, I don't think that's what Arturia is going for anyways with these synthesizers, so that might once again be me nitpicking on something that's very much intended. So yeah, I'll leave you with some sounds of the CMI. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of insight how this thing works and how you can actually use it. And that's it for now. See ya.